Well, good afternoon. My name is J.R. DeShazo, and I'm director of the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation here at UCLA. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our Keynote Roundtable on funding climate adaptation research. Our research is made possible through a collaboration between funding agencies and researchers. And today we have put together a star-studded keynote and panel for you to hear from what the different types of funders of climate adaptation research think are priorities, or how they go about allocating funding research for climate research. We'll have an opportunity to understand kind of their near-term goals, how those priorities have been affected by the pandemic and by the racial justice awareness that is emerging. And so we're really looking forward to today's discussion. I want to thank our sponsors who've made the symposium possible, both our funders, Southern California Edison, Burrell Happold, and the California Strategic Growth Council for their financial support, as well as our many partners who've helped us put together today's events. And I want to go ahead and kick things off. It's my great honor and pleasure to welcome the California Secretary for Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, to give us some opening remarks. Secretary Crowfoot was appointed to the California Secretary of Natural Resources by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019. He brings more than 20 years of experience. I've had the great pleasure of working with Wade in his capacity as CEO of the Water Foundation, in his capacity as Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Senior Advisor to Governor Jerry Brown during the Brown administration. Secretary Crowfoot's also worked as the West Coast Regional Director of the Environmental Defense Fund, and a long time ago was the environmental advisor to the then San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom. Secretary Crowfoot, thank you so much for making time out of your extremely busy schedule as you, on a day-to-day basis, grapple with the impacts of climate adaptation here in the state of California. The floor is yours.
Hey, thanks so much. It's great to be with you personally again, JR, and with the whole Luskin and UCLA team. I think you know that we have a proud Bruin on our staff in Mark Gold, who actually came from UCLA. So I'm so sick of hearing about UCLA's groundbreaking climate research. But I say that jokingly. I know we have scientists, obviously, and researchers from across the state and maybe beyond California. And first of all, I just want to thank you for the work that you do. We obviously in California feel very strong that everything we do on both climate mitigation and adaptation, but then also generally natural resource management, needs to be driven by science. And if you follow the political discussion on climate change, you may know when we had a chance to meet with the president last week, we made that abundantly clear that science actually does know, and that all of what we need to do protect people and nature from the impacts of climate change has to be driven by science. So I have to say, the work that you do is not only important, it's absolutely essential to how we navigate things from here. Many of us, I think, are alarmed with the accelerated impacts of climate change and the extreme events that we're seeing driven by climate change. I think we all know that there is complexity and nuance in the impact that climate change is having on these events, but nevertheless, our challenges are getting worse as a result of climate. In California, we talk about really 5 major threats, probably not exclusive, but 5 major threats from climate change: wildfires, drought, flooding, sea level rise and coastal erosion, and extreme heat. And this summer has put an exclamation point on the need to build our climate resilience as we continue to fight fires. Not too far from UCLA, the Bobcat fire, threatens communities in the San Gabriel Valley, almost 90,000 acres. almost 4 million acres of California's landmass, which is about 4% of our state, has burned in the last couple of months. And that is a record-shattering total of fire burning in California in a given year in our state's history. We know that winter temperatures that have increased have contributed to dry forests and worsened drought that led to the epic tree mortality that we've experienced across the Sierra Nevada. We know that increased summer temperatures last August was the hottest August on record. We know that these summer temperatures and these exploding records on heat are driving worse and worse fire behavior. And that's not to discount on the wildfires, all the things that have happened that have contributed to this growing catastrophic fire risk, which includes a century of a lack of forest management. But the fact is, climate is impacting our nature. It is threatening our communities. It does require us to think about the work we do differently, and importantly, make different investments and different policies and programs. I think if I can say one thing to you as you begin your discussion is I really appreciate every effort you make to develop scientific research and data that's actionable for us in government, whether that means you're a resource manager at the Department of Fish and Wildlife or a water planning hydrologist at our Department of Water Resources, or whether you're prioritizing forest management programs at CAL FIRE. What we need is really scientific understanding that can inform our decision making. Now, that's not to diminish the importance of basic science or global scientific research, but really in California, what we desire most is downscaled science that can really inform the decisions that we make here in coming decades. We're developing our 5th climate assessment in California. We're really proud that California, I believe, is the only state that really has its own regular investment in climate science that obviously complements the federal or the national climate assessment. Obviously, given this presidential administration, the future of the national climate assessment is in doubt. So our state climate assessment has never been more important. And JR and others here joining us today, we'll look to work with you on really structuring that climate assessment, which of course funds much of the research that we need here in the state. Increasingly, so we're really interested in multiple benefit projects. In other words, finding ways to steward our nature and natural resources to both maximize sequestration, or that removal of carbon from the atmosphere, but at the same time building resilience, protecting communities and natural places from the impacts of climate change, but at the same time having other benefits. For example, we know that healthy forest management not only maximizes sequestration, minimizes or limits or reduces the threats of catastrophic wildfire, but there's also significant benefits for the ecosystem and biodiversity, as well as the watershed, recognizing that our forested watersheds in the mountains are the beginning of our water conveyance system. So increasingly, where science can help us understand positive actions we can take and then quantify or specify the benefits across different priorities, it is really quite helpful. Lastly, I'll say, JR, as I turn it back to you to get the discussion underway, I know we're very optimistic in California. While this has been a very challenging year between the global pandemic and the fires and the smoke that created, and at times it's felt a little apocalyptic, we know in California that we will continue to lead the world, transitioning our economy to a low carbon economy. Lots happening on that front. And that we increasingly, with our governor and our legislative leaders, understand that while we do that, we have to, and we can, and we will make investments to build our climate resilience. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you. We in state government know that the solutions are not found in Sacramento. They're found across the state. And frankly, driven by people outside of government, namely you all. in terms of helping us understand what are the threats we face and then how can we address them. So I think this is a really timely discussion. JR, thanks for having me, and really look forward to not only the conversation here today, but closer links between certainly our agency, but all state agencies and folks doing the important scientific research in this space. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot, for those remarks. And your request that our research be actionable, I think, is I think a promising suggestion of that is we have over 2,000 registrants for this symposium, many of whom are coming from agencies like Cal OSHA, like the CPUC in charge of our utilities, the Department of Education, which has to manage extreme heat for our students. And so I'm really heartened that the symposium can be a portal for sharing new research and learning about the priorities of policymakers so we can set future research agendas. So very, very grateful to have your participation.
And JR, can I make 2 points that I neglected to make just ever so quickly?
Of course.
The first is, one principle we're applying to all of our work on climate is protecting the most vulnerable communities. And I think we all have to acknowledge that folks are impacted differently by these threats based on where you live, the amount of resources you have, et cetera. And so I would just ask, within the scientific research and the research that you do to really, where there are those differing impacts, help us understand those, because the commitment that, Governor Newsom and we have is to really emphasize protecting the most vulnerable communities. And then second is to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge or traditional practices, particularly among our Native American or tribal communities. We're working to do that in the state, recognizing that some of the most well-proven effective stewardship has actually been passed along generation to generation within our tribal communities. It doesn't present itself as scientific research or scientific programs the way that a lot of us are used to it in sort of the Western scientific tradition, but it's absolutely essential. And we would be really foolish not to actually utilize and partner with tribal communities on those insights. So really excited about the integration of that type of knowledge and wisdom into the scientific research you do. Thanks, JR.
Thank you, Secretary. And in fact, your rejoinder there anticipated several remarks that were already popping up in the Q&A chat box around how do we make sure our most disadvantaged communities and our tribal communities become integrated into the climate adaptation process so that we make them more resilient, since they bear a disproportionate impact of these different disasters and changes. All right. Well, let me now turn to our esteemed panel. We're going to start with a national perspective and start with a foundation perspective. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jalone White-Newsom, who is the Senior Program Officer in the Environment Program at the Kretzky Foundation. And she manages the Climate Resilient and Equitable Water Systems Initiative, and also leads grant making at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity. Dr. White-Newsom, the floor is yours.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for your comments, and particularly the last two, super important. But thank you always for your passion and your work and the work of the administration. And I just want to thank JR and other folks for the opportunity to have this conversation. Many thanks to the 2,000 or so of y'all that are joining this virtual conversation. I know there is wonderful diversity of representation here, particularly geographic diversity, but I want to first start by acknowledging the firefighters in California and all the first responders and just everything that y'all have been going through over the past several months and years, but also the medical practitioners those that are in frontline communities that have been responding to COVID, responding to racial injustice, responding to multiple things. So thank you all to those who are out here, and thank you for your resilience. So for almost the past 5 years, I've had the privilege of working at the Kresge Foundation. And we're a national private foundation, for those of you that haven't heard of us. We're headquartered in southeastern Michigan with 2 dynamic offices, one in wonderful Detroit, and the other is headquartered in Troy, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. And so our mission for almost the last 100 years has been really to advance opportunities in low-income communities across different program areas. And what I would say as a member of our environment team, our mission is really around climate adaptation and building climate resilience in communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And that is, again, making sure that whatever we do, whatever we fund, really advances the quality of life for low-income communities and communities of color, and those, again, that are disproportionately impacted by climate. So we seek to do that in really 3 overarching grant-making strategies that I would say there's a little bit of applied research in each of them. So the 3 strategies are urban leadership, the second is building evidence for change, and the third is planning for change. So I'll start quickly with building urban leadership. So what we try and do is support really visionary urban leaders. And that definition of urban leaders can go from frontline community organizations to folks that are working in government. And so the thing is, climate adaptation really requires people that deeply understand how climate change puts the community at risk, and doing it in a way that doesn't exacerbate inequities, but actually creates benefits for everyone. So that's our building urban leadership bucket. The second bucket is really building evidence for change, and that is where a lot of our applied research sits. And so we invest again in applied research and innovation that really gives us the opportunity to test new ideas, to curate promising solutions, to give advocates and leaders the information and evidence they need to pursue good solutions that are beneficial to everyone. The third strategy is planning for change. And this is where we focus on energy systems and water systems. Again, if you don't have energy and if you don't have water, again, people in cities in particular, this impacts your health, your safety, your ability to make a living. And so what we try and do is fund initiatives that actually transform these systems to, again, address some of the institutional and structural racism that are inherent in these huge sectors. So for those of you that may or may not be familiar with philanthropy or maybe haven't worked for a foundation, even I think about my former life where I was just on the other side as a grant seeker, you know, sometimes the foundation world can seem to be a little bit inflexible, not too responsive, can be downright rigid and risk averse at times. But I would say at this particular time in our country, in light of COVID, in light of the much needed attention and raised awareness to racial injustice that has happened on the Black and Brown communities over the last 100 years or so, and the fact that climate change is hitting us harder, faster, and stronger, I am encouraged because I see philanthropy actually shifting. I see the priorities of philanthropy shifting and hopefully changing for the better. So at Kresge, I would say that we have 3 overarching perspectives that I anticipate will guide our grant making over the next several years. One is that climate adaptation has taken on a new level of importance and will not be achieved without addressing racial injustice in every part of the solution set. So whether we're funding research, whether we're funding operating support for an organization, that has to be a part of the solution set. The second piece is that climate adaptation research must center, be created, respond to, and address the questions, barriers, challenges, and successes of frontline communities. Intentional, authentic partnerships are needed between researchers and communities. I can't say that enough. And third, climate adaptation research must begin to address both qualitatively and quantitatively institutional and systemic racism that will continue to disrupt the systems that continue to put Black and Brown communities at a disproportionate risk. And similar to Secretary Crowfoot, I would echo all Western knowledge is that is not the end all be all. So the stories, the soft stuff, that is super important as well. So we can no longer do research for research's sake. Heck, I'm a scientist, engineer, I'm a nerd at heart, I love it. But unfortunately, these challenges that we're facing in terms of climate change, pandemics, and other national crises, they will continue to hit us at the same time. And we have to solve for all of these things at the same time, not in the traditional funding silos as philanthropy has done and operated over many years. So I'm excited about the future, and I look forward to our discussion. So thanks, JR.
Thank you so much, Dr. White-Newsom. Really appreciate you sharing your perspective and your foundation's priorities as we go forward. Next, sticking at a national level, but shifting to government funding agencies, I'm very, very pleased to have a dynamic duo from the National Science Foundation with us today. Dr. Bob O'Connor. Dr. O'Connor has been directing the Decision Science and Managed Sciences program at NSF for quite some time. I had the pleasure almost 2 decades ago of working with Bob. And he also manages several interdirectorate competitions. And Dr. Walter Peacock, who's currently the program director for the Humans, Disasters, and the Built Environment program in the Engineering Directorate. He's also involved in NSF special initiatives, which are very relevant to what we're going to discuss today, including Coastlines and People, Smart and Connected Communities, and the Civic Innovation Challenge, and also the Disaster Resilience Research grant-making process. So Bob and Walter, without further ado, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. It is an honor to be speaking on this topic with this group. I promise to be both blunt and brief. Is climate change adaptation a priority for the National Science Foundation? I can say emphatically yes and no. And I'll explain that answer. NSF has a large number of core programs, sociology, biology, all over the place. The genius of NSF in these programs is that the program officers do not a priori sit down and say, okay, this year we're going to look for research on X and Y. So for example, if you spoke with the people who run the economics program and you said, okay, for this fall's competition, are you looking to fund research on international trade, macroeconomics, the economic effects of climate change? What are you looking for? Their honest answer is going to be, we want you to tell us what our priorities should be. So the no answer for the core programs to is it a priority. It's not a priority because we don't have any. We don't preset what we're going to fund and what topics or methods we are looking for. But at the same time, the answer is an emphatic yes, but that's up to you. You have to make it a priority by sending us great proposals. Well, what the heck is a great proposal? Well, a great proposal is one where it is strong on the 2 NSF funding criteria. Intellectual merit is going to advance the basic understanding in the field. And second, broader impacts. The new knowledge will be useful. Well, at the same time, not every core program has an equal relevance to climate change adaptations. 2 areas of particular relevance is the Social Behavior and Economic Sciences Directorate, those programs in the division within which I reside, namely social and economic sciences. Walt is here from the engineering directorate, despite his sociology background, and he manages a program in the division of civil, mechanical, and manufacturing innovation, and he will tell you more about that program later. Now, the core programs that's where most of the money is, but we still have special solicitations and initiatives, and we'll talk about some of those that have particular relevance for climate change adaptation. Again, though, they only have particular relevance to that topic if you guys send us strong proposals. The door is open. Okay, what else? There's the map. I'm not going to go over this. The NSF is divided into directorate. It's a very flat bureaucracy. My boss's 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 boss is the President of the United States. Okay, why do you want funding from us? Well, we fund curiosity-driven research, which means we'll fund anything that's basic. Basic does not mean irrelevant to addressing contemporary problems such as climate change. Quite the opposite. Please remember, our second funding criteria are broader impact, that the new knowledge would be useful. So the thought that your research will produce actionable knowledge is not a problem, quite the opposite to the National Science Foundation. That's a good thing. So why else do you want money from us? Well, we pay full overhead, which at UCLA is what, 55%? So if you want to do $100,000 worth of research, the check would be for $155,000. This makes your dean happy. We also provide a couple of months of additional salary support, and we use the grant mechanism. This is important in that essentially a grant is a gift. We don't micromanage. If you're good enough to get the money, you're good enough to have a lot of leeway to, within your proposal, spend it and react to changes as you do your research. What you owe me, if I'm your program officer, is an annual report. That's around 8 pages. So it's great money. It's a great opportunity for you to say, you know, I'm really concerned about this climate, so-and-so. This is where we need research, and make a case. Okay, if you're unclear where to send it, what particular program, well, these are the ones in my division that seem most susceptible to research that would relate to climate change adaptation. Accountable institutions and behavior was formerly known as political science. The P word has kind of a nasty connotation to many, so that's new. You can take a look at what they fund, and you can see if this fits what you want to do. My program is Decision Risk and Management Sciences. You can read the list. But almost anything that's systematic science that you think, you know, we really should look at this, the science of organizations, how they affect blah, blah, blah. Okay. 2 points I'll make. If you want to find out, well, what does NSF really do? Proposals are private. I won't even tell you the name of anybody who sent one in, but awards are public. So you can go to the website and find a one-page abstract that says X amount of money to J.R. DeShazo to research so-and-so, a couple of paragraphs on what he's doing. So you can find out what these programs are funding. The other division in the Social Behavior and Economic Sciences Directorate is Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences. Those programs I've listed there also are very susceptible or receptive to climate change adaptation research, human, environmental, and geographical sciences, for example. Okay. This is my last slide until we turn it over to Walt, who I can attest is much more coherent than I am. What we fund is, you know, basic research that looks at how people make decisions, but climate change adaptation can be a really good test, but how people make decisions, organizations, political units, private sector, families, the whole smear. So there's a great opportunity. If you're unclear to say, I don't know if this would fit in your program or somewhere else at NSF, what I ask you to do is send me a one-pager, and Walt will say the same thing. Send it to him. That is a one-pager that says, what do you want to do? what is the theoretical or methodological advance likely? What's the literature that you're building on? That's really it. We also, by the way, fund doctoral dissertation improvement grants and rapids. A rapid award is where there are ephemeral data that you've got to get out there now, such as flood relief efforts. We can turn those over in 24 hours. Walt, please continue and clarify and fix everything I've said that's been inaccurate.
That'll take too long, Bob, so I'll just I am Walt Peacock. I'm a program director in engineering in the division of civil, mechanical, and manufacturing innovation. This is the organizational chart for my division. The ones that are kind of highlighted there in orange are programs that do fund a great degree of broader hazard and climate kinds of issues. They're a bit more in the engineering focused area, but they also do fund some social sciences. Bob has already told you my hidden secret, and that is that I am a social science. My degree's in sociology, and I'm the professor of urban planning at Texas A&M when I'm not at NSF as well, too. My program is Humans, Disasters, and the Built Environment. That program really focuses on all three of those aspects and tries to look at those or foster research that looks at the interactions among those issues. So looking at humans or broader social systems, the built environment, and that disaster context. And if you think about climate change, it certainly is associated with changing hazard profiles and, as a consequence, then vulnerabilities of our human and social systems, as well as their built environment. And those systems, those environments certainly are having major consequences on climate and climate change related issues. So this is a natural program that should be thought about, at least for entertaining climate and climate change related issues. I would encourage you to look at the Ipcc 2012 document on managing risk of extreme events and disasters to advance climate change adaptation. I really love this document because it clearly says, look, if you're dealing with disaster risk reduction, you're looking at policies related to those issues. You are also fundamentally looking at climate and climate adaptation work as well, too. So, and this program has been funding work along those lines. Our program's changed names, a little bit of emphasis areas, but for over 40 years of research in this area. So be sure you look at that research as well, too, when submitting proposals to the program as well, too. So Bob and I have talked about the core and programs, and they are the major drivers of what's funded out there. The only difference between what Bob's programs and my program in engineering is that we don't have deadlines in engineering, so proposals can come in whenever. Those special solicitations, though, represent really wonderful opportunities to pull together large teams, interdisciplinary work, and look at a great variety of different issues related to climate change issues. Be careful, there are deadlines, there are special kind of requirements with respect to these programs. But one, for example, is the career program. This is a wonderful grant opportunity for young faculty. Get funding for 5 years, $500K or more to support that research, getting that going, building that foundation, but also building the educational foundation, linking together your research and your educational goals and your classes as well, too. So it really gives a wonderful way of pushing that forward. Other ones that Bob has kind of already mentioned, COPE is a big one. It's been funded since 2018. I fully anticipate that something will happen next year, given budget constraints and the like. But right now, we're looking at both focused hubs as well as large-scale hubs. 1 million for focus, 2 to 4 million for large-scale hubs. So really pulling together climate science, pulling together engineering, pulling together social sciences to actually grapple with and tackle problems in the coastal zone. Smart and Connected Communities is a really unique program as well. This is funded out of SCI's directorate, which is Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering. look at what they fund. Just a great variety of different topics, great variety of different issues. Every single one of these has climate and climate written right all over it. And so look at these. We already have rolled out $43 million in funding this last fiscal year, and there will be a new round as well too. A critical component in these is including that community as well. So getting the community involved with you to help the basic science produce information that will actually have consequences for the changing natures of our policies and the like. Another element of that one is civic innovation. This one actually flips things on upside down in that it really should be community driven, linking together with university researchers and other researchers to actually tackle issues at a very short term with major investments that will really help inform and bring science to bear and inform policy and policy changes as well as technological changes. And you notice one of those tracks is resilience to natural disasters. So lots of room for climate work in that area as well too. Two resources that are going to be critical is the Bible for getting in the proposals and everything is the proposal guide. There's links on here to get to that. But also, as Bob mentioned, getting on the NSF website, getting and searching through awards, you can find out what's funded, what programs are funding those things, how much, how many years, et cetera. So it's a great place to search. And finally, as Bob mentioned, y'all drive the research. Get involved with NSF. Volunteer to be a reviewer, volunteer to be a panelist, find out what's going on and help influence what's happening. And do like me, join NSF periodically, spend a couple of years there, help drive the programs and the like in there too. So build that into your plan for your future as well too. That's it.
All right, thank you so much, Bob and Walt. We really appreciate you giving us that overview and a guide to the opportunity as they stand now over the next bit. All right, well, we're going to shift from a national focus now down to a California and even a sub-regional focus. It's my great pleasure to invite Bren Lindblad, who is the Deputy Director for Climate Resolve, to speak. She focuses on facilitating cross-sector collaborations with a primary focus on transportation and urban cooling. And for those of you who don't know, Climate Resolve is unique in its almost exclusive focus on the need for policy and planning development in the space of climate adaptation. They were a pioneer here in Los Angeles and in California in asking for science and community participation in the effort to prepare California for future climate change. Bren, the floor is yours.
Thanks, JR. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna start by sharing a bit more about who we are at Climate Resolve and how research crucially fits into our theory of change. And then I'll share with you some of my wishes or an invitation, if you will, for the research community and funders out there. So Climate Resolve, we are a local nonprofit, as JR said, based here in LA, and we focus on implementing practical solutions to climate change that advance equity. So we are all for having the thoughtful, holistic, intersectional considerations and doing the research and planning that's needed to make sure that the solutions we go for aren't going to have unintended consequences. But we can also be an impatient bunch and we want to get to action. So walking the walk is the goal, not just talk. We see a lot of inequality in the world around us. And so we are only interested in solutions that reduce disparities, not exacerbate them. So we look to remove barriers to accessing opportunity, shift power and resources to create a society where everyone can thrive and no one is marginalized. And we do that by centering the needs of vulnerable people. We're often functioning as a bridge between policymakers, researchers, and communities. We try to kind of feel out everyone's values and mandates and see where there's opportunity for alignment and synergy and get people rowing in the same direction. So, I don't know about you, but I look at the world around me and I see a lot of opportunity to be doing things differently as a society than we are right now. But to get institutions to change and to justify investments that differ from the status quo, we need to be equipped with really solid research. So that's why I'm glad all of you researchers are here. I present to you at this snapshot in time, from my perspective, what some of the top research priorities are. Areas that could use a bit more research to help us chart the path forward. And I am not going to go through this whole list right now. There's not time for that, but I'll give you a sample. So the first bullet, California's wildfires are making it clear that sprawl in the urban fringes and the fringes is a maladaptive practice. But our society is not at the point yet of outlawing such sprawl. So can the research community help us make the case by uncovering some of the externalities of that sprawl development, such as how it increases insurance premiums for everyone everywhere, and how the cost of extending power infrastructure to those outlying areas is similarly borne by all ratepayers. I don't really think these bullet points get my full points across, though. So I would encourage you to please read through my full wish list written out as research questions, which you can find in the resources widget of the conference console. And I'm usually a pretty optimistic person, but I don't think you reading through that list is really going to be enough either to make sure we are on the same page about things. I think we're going to need some back and forth. So with my last slide, I'm going to encourage you to get out of your comfort zone a bit maybe and think of ways that your research projects can try to engage with community members throughout the process in order to ensure that it's really in service of an equity agenda and ultimately actionable. So let me give you some examples of ways that your research can try to consider community perspectives. External advisory panels are a way that you can make sure you're disaggregating data in ways that show real-world phenomena. Focus groups are a way to check in with community members and see what sorts of solutions are resonating with them, and also to notice if you're using jargon that's preventing you from being able to connect with stakeholders. Even better, form a partnership with a community-based organization and from the outset work collaboratively to define your research questions, to scope out what sorts of qualitative and quantitative data or evidence would help you answer those questions, and work together to develop strategies for collecting that evidence. One strategy that we like to use when we're trying to survey community members is and trying to get them to engage in our project in a meaningful way, not eyes glazed over, but kind of get on the same page with us, is we like to hire project interns who are graduates from the local high school. And it helps us make sure that we are engaging with people using terms that they understand, which makes the data more valuable. And ultimately, the community is more receptive to our recommendations if they feel like they've been heard and we've been responsive to their feedback. Let me pause, actually. Funders. We need you, and that includes state agencies, funding stipends and deep community engagement work. Funders, this one's for you too. What if we flip the script and instead of researchers seeking out communities to work with, what if community-based organizations were given the funds to then hire researchers to help them conduct community needs assessments or feasibility studies? That way, we know that the research is scoped out in a way that's really in service of those communities. And lastly, hosting community experts on panels, kind of like how I'm here talking to you today. It's a way to show respect and that you understand that lived experiences matter when we're charting the path forward. And it's also a way to hold the research community accountable to making sure they're presenting their findings in terms that are understandable and can lead to action. So I know research is hard work, and I appreciate the slog that you guys go through sometimes. I just want to make sure that at the end of it all, it's not getting lost in the shuffle, and that it's actually having an impact and making the world a better place. So, I think funders want that too, we've heard today. So if any of this was intimidating or compelling, please reach out. Climate Resolve is here to help and want to make sure your research project is one that funders are going to be excited to fund. So thank you. Back to you, JR.
Thank you so much, Bryn. That was terrific. Really appreciate your perspective and your advice. All right, you know, there is one level of funding that we have left out of this discussion. I realize in reflecting on my own experience, and which is the state level funders. And so I know it's going to vary from state to state, but here in California, like many states, there are resource agencies, whether it's the Public Utilities Commission, the Department of Water Resources, Department of Housing or Education, all of whom I think have funded climate adaptation type work. And then, of course, one of the things that I think might be unique within the state of California is the Strategic Growth Council, which I think you heard from Dr. White-Newsom and from Bryn, the need to integrate communities, and also the Civic Innovation Challenge with the NSF, the need to integrate community leadership and community-based organizations into the research. And the Strategic Growth Council has tried to do that, require that as a precondition for funding, taking many of Bryn's recommendations and making them the centerpiece, really, of that collaborative research that happens. So I want to call out that there is a funding group that I've omitted and we've omitted. And maybe next time we all convene, we can invite people to how they approach setting their priorities. But I want to thank the audience for the many questions that you have submitted, and I want to just take a moment to kind of reflect back some of those questions to our panelists now. So one of the questions really arose, and I'm going to direct it to Bob and Walter. I'm going to ask you to answer this question kind of on behalf of other federal agencies. I know it's going to fall outside of your purview. You know, but here at UCLA, when we focused on climate science, it was quickly recognized that there is the need for the humanities in both connecting to people and telling stories about change, and also conveying and capturing the narratives that traditional communities share and that oral tradition. And so I had 2 or 3 questions that ask, how are there funding opportunities to focus on the humanities, on anthropology and more cultural living resources, in addition to the scientific and engineering resources discussed?
Well, my colleagues who manage the NSF program in cultural anthropology consider their work quite scientific, by the way. There is qualitative work that is systematic, fact-based. So I think also the thought that somehow there's humanity and then there's science on the other side, you know, we're not talking particle physics here. You know, we're talking, at least in the social science directorate, it's humans, and looking systematically at understanding, do we fund purely humanistic research? No, we're not. We're the National Science Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
There is the National Institute for the Humanities that does fund that work, fortunately, in my view. Walt?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now I do think well, first of all, I think there are elements of, as Bob was suggesting, good qualitative research that is fundamentally important for both the science and engineering as well, too. So oftentimes we see components of that in larger research projects to help inform the quantitative and mathematical work that is going on. So I think it can go hand in hand. Second of all, we have 2 main criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. And oftentimes it's through those broader impacts that these other approaches can be brought to bear to help ensure not only the relevance of the science, but also getting the science out there as well, too. So I think there are good opportunities for partnerships there as well, too, in working with local organizations that are actually involved in these broader activities that can help in that process. Inform as well as spread the word.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, gentlemen.
Emphatically, NSF funds qualitative research. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to direct the next question to Dr. White-Newsome. So one of the questions that, a couple of actually questions sort of point to this basic simple question, which is, and I would ask you, Dr. White-Newsome, to consider other foundations in terms of, as you answer as well, but the question is, how do foundations decide what to fund? What process do they go through in setting funding priorities?
Sure. So can I just make a quick comment on that last question and then answer your question? So for those that are interested, so there's a project that we've been supporting with the Trust for Public Land for so many years. And what we did internally was it wasn't only an environment program grant, but we also included our arts and culture colleagues, our health colleagues, and another program within the foundation. And what was cool about it, it involved research on climate change that particularly developed tools that help build climate resiliency in New Orleans and other cities, but it incorporated outreach and engagement of artists. And so it was a wonderful way, again, to reach populations that you might not reach with just the hard science. And I think that's what's really important with research. Like, you get so many types of data from many different people, and incorporating artists and musicians is one way of doing that. And we do fund stuff like that, fun stuff. So I just wanted to put that out there. So to your question, JR, how do foundations make decisions on how they fund? So I work a lot with a group called the Urban Water Funders Network, which includes foundations from across the country, some in California like Pisces, the Water Foundation. We have a good time. But I would say there's a couple of things that are priority. One, understanding what the foundation is concerned about. And if you are coming with a proposal or a suggestion that doesn't align with the mission of the foundation or the strategy of the program areas, then you probably won't be considered. That's one thing. The second piece is really having a clear understanding of the cycle of the foundation. So some foundations award grants monthly, some quarterly, some a couple of times a year. So that's super important to understand. And then also, just like organizational strategies change, foundation strategies change. So it's important to build a relationship with a program officer so you can understand the black box of philanthropy, because when we change our strategies, sometimes that changes how we fund and who we fund. So super important to understand not only strategic shifts, but also what are the priorities of foundations. And so now, again, in this world, we are seeing priorities shift for foundations. So again, our focus might be now, which I hope it will sustain, on supporting community-based organizations and frontline organizations and COVID response and things of that nature. So really understanding the priorities, the mission, and how foundations function is one way to kind of tease out the madness of philanthropy.
Great, thank you for that answer. Bryn, I'd like to throw this one in your direction, but also offer it to any of our panelists. So I got a couple of questions on if municipal leaders, especially megacity mayoral leaderships and things like that, have research needs. What are examples of them being able to help set research agendas? And I guess who's aligned with funding the research needs of sort of local and regional government?
Sure. And sausage making, it's not always a straight path. I would say, in LA, we've got urban cooling goals that we're going to put out there. And then we needed to figure out a little bit, what are we measuring? How do we track progress in that, and what sort of strategies could help us make progress? So, I'd say the more you know, the more questions you have. So I would say the more we just started to look at sort of what's important in urban heat mitigation. We talked to public health officials or experts, researchers, including UCLA. And they helped us understand that it's not only extreme heat exposure in the middle of the day, but that really for public health reasons, bodies need to be able to recover at night. So we need our urban environment to be cooling down at night. And that helped kind of lead us to thermal imagery from satellites from JPL, where we then see that it's our asphalt roads that are radiating the heat and preventing us from the urban environment from being able to cool down. And then, we look to additional researchers to help us figure out what's the right amount of reflectivity and sort of albedo to get that mix right. So I think it's kind of the more we learn, the more questions we have, the more the public gets sort of familiar with what sort of cooling strategies we might go down. They have questions, and it's just kind of making sure that we're equipped with all the information that we need to feel like we're pursuing sensible solutions.
Okay, thank you. So this will be my last formal question from the audience, and it's a two-part question, and I won't pre-designate it. So you all sort of reflect on whether you have an answer for this. But the question, the first part of the question is, how has COVID changed the kinds of research priorities for your organization or organizations like yours? And second, we've heard stressed the importance of connecting with action-oriented community leadership, whether it's community-based organizations, policymakers, what have you. From your perspective, how much has COVID prevented those kinds of connections and the transmission of relevant knowledge for action at that level?
Well,
I can speak.
Go ahead, Bob.
Let me speak quickly for my program. DRMS was affected enormously. We fund research on risk communications. I funded like 28 rapid awards for an average amount of like $190,000 each on communicating and who's doing what and what type of messages produce what type of behavior. So as far as it changed the priority, and that we spent a lot of money that would have gone somewhere else because of the pandemic. Walt?
So I'll tackle the second part of your question. It certainly had a profound effect on the science as well as on the ability to work with local communities, right? I mean, everybody is addressing those issues. We are open to folks that we have funded to actually, work with us, talk with us about how things are changing, what are the impacts. That's one of the wonderful things about the National Science Foundation is allowing for that flexibility. And it is certainly something that we're entertaining as well, too. I mean, we are not funding focus groups to go out and, basically become a spreader event as well, too. So it is having major consequences for how the science is adapting and shifting in terms of that. And I honestly feel like we are in a major learning curve right now in terms of trying to understand how best to carry out the science, how best to carry out our methods and methodological issues. And it is forcing changes that are unanticipated as well.
Yeah, I'd still say quickly that our mission is to support good science in the public interest. We are not an advocacy organization. And in fact, if you ask what is NSF's position on climate change, the answer is our charter does not allow us to have any position on anything except that science is good. So
thank you.
But the people we fund are free to interpret the policy relevance of their findings in any way they want to. We don't endorse nor disavow what they say their science means.
Okay, great. Jalon or Bren, would either of you like the last word or words on the COVID questions?
I'm trying to. Oh, go ahead, Bren.
All right. Maybe I'll start by saying what I was going to say second. But I think figuring out how to work in this virtual space and creating community engagement methods where people feel comfortable to speak up and kind of share that their lived experiences, and as we try to kind of figure out what's behind people's behavior and what sort of solutions they would get behind and wouldn't. Navigating that virtual space is a new challenge for us. We're used to kind of going to where people are and meeting them on the street if need be, right? So that virtual space is one I would mention. And the other thing I would mention is just the renewed importance of air quality. Here in LA, we've been making progress for many years reducing our smog problem, but now with hotter temperatures and more wildfires, it's back to being a crucial issue that we need more focused attention on the different sources of pollution and what potential solutions might be, as we realize that respiratory health is important in this new pandemic too.
Can I say
great things? Well, go ahead, Jalon, please.
Just really quickly, I think in terms of foundations, like we're realizing as we talk about climate change, COVID is actually having a huge impact on the resilience of communities that are already beyond resilient. So I think as a foundation, this has forced us to be more responsive. So not only giving grants to get mask and sanitizer, but also up in the technology and the needs of communities. And I would say just the last thing is that in terms of, I would say, communities and their genius in working around many systems of oppression and challenge, they continue to organize, they continue to share information in all sorts of creative ways. And so the work is happening and it's going to continue to happen. And I think it's our job as funders is to just get in there and support what their needs are. So thank you for the extra time, JR.
Fantastic. No, thank you all. Well, let me sadly bring us to a close since we're just a little bit over and we have a whole afternoon of sessions to enjoy. First, just let me thank each of you, our speakers and panelists, for taking the time today to be with us and share your experience and perspective and suggestions. We're very grateful for that and hope to have you back in the future. I would say there were probably 10 or 15 questions that really deserve answering that we didn't get a chance to answer that were in the Q&A. Some of them, actually, I think they're comments for every single one of our panelists in the Q&A. So if you'd be willing to have a look at the Q&A and feel free to respond if you'd like. You can respond directly to questions. And then let me just thank the participants who signed in today. We're very grateful to have you. Thank you for your questions. I hope this panel provided some useful frameworks and information. We're really excited about building a climate adaptation research and practitioner community that supports one another as we move forward. We need each other. And with that, I'll close. I hope you guys enjoy the afternoon sessions and thank you so much for being with us.